Okay, everybody. Good evening to you all. Today's class is titled Balancing the Spiritual and the Physical. It's actually based on a teaching in the Zohar, a famous teaching in the Zohar. And we'll get right to it now. I assume the sound is okay, yes? Okay, fine. So, the story is as follows. The various princes of the tribes, there were 12 tribes of Israel, as we know. Each of the princes of the tribes brought, as a representative of the tribe, brought a gift to the inauguration of the tabernacle, which had just been built. This is in this week's Torah reading called Naso. So each of the princes brought an offering, and each of the offerings that the prince brought was identical to the other ones. It was identical in form, but not necessarily identical in in intention. Each had a different intention in what they did. But anyway, the Zohar focuses on a verse where it's talking about the incense cups. Either were sort of cups or spoons, rather, in which the incense was measured. And each of the princes brought a spoon, a golden spoon, and the spoon was filled with incense. And each of the spoons weighed 10 shekels. That was the weight of the weight in gold of each of the spoons. Each of them weighed 10 shekels. After the entire description of the gifts, which is repeated just with the name, the only change is really the name of the prince of the tribe. This is repeated 12 times. And the reason being because each of them had a different intention in his bringing the gift. In other words, each gift represented, there were various parts of the gifts and donations to the sanctuary, but each aspect of it represented a different idea, a different meditation that each of the princes of the tribes had. Each one had a different meditation, and so each one brought even though it was the identical gift, each one had to bring it, and it's repeated, therefore, in the Torah 12 times, making this particular section the longest section in the Torah. In any event, after the entire, all the princes had given their gifts, so Moses sums the whole thing up and exactly what was given. And one of the expressions over there is that there were 12 gold spoons for the incense, and each one weighed 10 shekels. And the way it says, the verse says it like this, and each spoon was asara hakaf. Each spoon was 10. Or to say it more literally, the way it was actually stated in the verse, 10 the spoons. Now, a spoon, the word kaf, which is used here for spoon or scoop, is also the word that is used for a scale. As you probably know, in the old days, scales usually had two pans, and there was a piece of metal or a piece of marble, triangular marble in the middle, and that's how you would weigh the various things. It would go on the very sharp edge of the marble, on the sharp edge of the metal, and that's how you would weigh the two pans against each other. So in one you had a weight, let's say, of a pound, and whatever you wanted to weigh out as a pound, you put in the other side, in the other pan of the scale. So the pan of the scale is also called a kaf. And it's called in the full terminology, kaf moznaim, the pan of the scales. Like there were two pans, each weighing against each other. So along comes the Zohar, and the Zohar says, when the verse says, asara hakaf, 10 each spoon, or each scoop, or each pan, there's a hidden intention over here. Says the Zohar, when it says asara, 10, One is referring to the 10 commandments, and the other is referring to the 10 utterances by which the world was created. Now, we're all familiar with the 10 commandments, and I'm going to go through them really one by one. But, says the Zohar, the balance of the two, there were 10 commandments and 10 utterances, and they had to be properly balanced against each other. That's why it says, Asara, Asara, Kaf. Each of them weighed 10. In other words, each of the 10 sayings through which the world was created, the 10 Mamoros, and the 10 Dibrot, the 10 statements of the 10 commandments, had to be equally weighed, and I'll explain what that means shortly. But just to explain the idea of the 10 utterances through which the world was created. Now, when we say 10 utterances, basically what we're talking about is, just as you have, for example, in living cells of living creatures, you have DNA strands, and the DNA strands have certain letters associated with them randomly. I mean, there's no necessary letter that's associated with any particular thing, but the way the DNA strands are labeled by scientists is indicative, or it's instructive regarding the idea of how it works also with the idea of the 10 utterances through which the world was created. Now, let me explain this a little bit further. Everybody knows that at the basis of physical existence are certain energy strands, or certain energy components. If we want to go down to the level of atoms, or we can go down further than atoms, quarks and quasars and so on and so forth, there's all kinds of subatomic particles. But nevertheless, everyone will agree that basically the atom is ultimately a ball of energy, which once it splits, releases a tremendous amount of energy, and that's an atomic bomb. But there's a tremendous amount of energy just contained in every single atom, and that energy can be defined by certain permutations of scientific symbols for that particular form of energy. It's just like DNA. Similarly, the energy with which there's a basic format of all creation. It's all energy, but energy in different permutations, so to speak. These are called the 10 utterances, the 10 utterances by which the world was created, based on the Hebrew letters. The Zohar and the Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation, discuss that there are 22 letters with which the world was created. Now, each letter is said to be a form of raw energy, and each letter on its own does not create, but only when it's in combination with at least one other letter. So, the Sefer Yetzirah goes on to explain this at great length, how you have 22 letters forming the basic building blocks of creation. Now, if you take those 22 letters and you multiply them by themselves, so you actually get 22 times 21, not 22 times 22, because letters which are repeated are not counted. So, for example, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph, you don't have a permutation of Aleph, Aleph. You only have a permutation of Aleph, Bet, or Aleph, Gimel, Aleph, Dalet. So it's 22 times 21, and that forms altogether 462 combinations of two letters, of two-letter combinations. Half the combinations are where the letter comes earlier in the Hebrew alphabet, and And the other half of the combinations is where the starting letter is a letter that comes later in the alphabet. In other words, if you divide the alphabet in half, it's 22 letters. So you've 11 letters are the first letters, and 11 letters are the later letters. So you now have a combination of letters where you get what's called panim and achor. Panim means forward, in the forward mode. In other words, you have two letters, aleph and bet. Since aleph comes before bet, as an alphabet, since aleph comes before bet, that would be called panim, forward. When bet comes before aleph in the other combination, the opposite combination, that's called achor. So therefore, you have altogether, if you divide the 462 combinations into two, therefore it would be 231 forward combinations, panim, and 231 backward combinations. Okay. All of those together ultimately form the most basic building blocks that are spoken about in Kabbalah. But of course, the permutations don't stop there. They don't stop with just two-letter permutations. The permutations can continue to form much greater permutations, 3-letter, 4-letter, 5-letter permutations, and so on. And these permutations are, when they are joined together in a string, are called a mimer. A mimer meaning an utterance or a statement. This is a statement of creation that creates the various things that were created at the beginning of creation, which we're going to discuss shortly, like the sun and the moon and the stars and so on and so forth, and grasses and herbs and animals and creatures and human beings and so on and so forth. All of these were created with 10 utterances. But says the Zohar, that was only part of creation. The other part of creation was the 10 commandments. And these two have to balance each other. Because if they don't balance each other, then the world is a place which is going to ultimately be self-destructive. If it's not balanced by if the 10 utterances are not balanced by the 10 commandments, and I'll explain why shortly, then the world tends towards entropy, towards self-destruction. However, on the other hand, if you just have the 10 commandments and you don't have a physical world, then you don't have the manifestation of godliness in the physical world. You don't have holiness on the physical plane. You have only holiness in the heavens. And that's not the intention of creation, as I'll explain. So both of these things, therefore, the 10 utterances, creation, and the 10 commandments, spirituality, says the Zohar, have to come into balance. And the way they come into balance is they exactly parallel each other. The Zohar explains. They exactly parallel each other, meaning to say that the first commandment parallels the first utterance. Second commandment, the second utterance. The third commandment, the third utterance, and so on. So you can therefore parallel them sort of all the way down, 10 opposite 10. Right? 10 for 10. Okay. Now, let's just examine some of these, or maybe we'll get a chance to even examine all of them, all of the 10 utterances and the 10 commandments, and see how they sort of work together. See how each one is necessary, and without either of them, the world would not work properly. In fact, there's a book which you may want to have a look at. It's a very, very interesting book, written by a British scientist. In fact, he was, or maybe still is, the president of the Royal Society for Scientists, or whatever it's called, something like that, in Britain. His name is Rees. I forget his first name. Rees, Professor Rees, R-E-E-S, I think it is, or R-E-E-S-E. And the book in any event is called Just Six Numbers. So the book Just Six Numbers discusses how there's certain subatomic forces or various forces which keep the whole universe intact. And without these six forces, if any of them would be just a slightly different number, the whole thing would collapse and wouldn't work. Similarly here, the entire universe would essentially collapse were it not for the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments would remain on high, and they wouldn't have an effect on the world if it wasn't for a physical world which is created through the 10 utterances. So it behooves us, therefore, to understand the parallels between them. So, the first of the Ten Commandments is, I am the Lord your God. Which, I am the Lord your God who has brought you out of the land of Egypt, etc., etc. In other words, basically, this is the idea that a person is born into freedom. And when we say born into freedom, it's not talking about political freedom. It's talking about he's given the ability to choose. He's given the ability to choose or to become enslaved. In other words, he's got the ability to choose to be free, or the ability to be enslaved by his passions, by his desires, by his longings, by his fellow man, by the way he thinks about things, and so on and so forth. That's the first of the Ten Commandments. Therefore, I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. In other words, I took you out of the house of bondage. I took you out of slavery. I gave you freedom. That's the first commandment that a person has to know, that he's a free agent with free will, and that he is therefore given the ability to do the following thing. Let's look at the parallel utterance through which the world was created. The utterance of Vayom Elokim Yihi Or Vayihi Or. God said there shall be light, and there was light. Now, what is the meaning over here? The first act of creation essentially was light. In other words, at the very basis of everything, the most innermost recesses of all of creation is this light. Now it says, interestingly enough, God said there shall be light, and there was light. And the Zohar points out, and it's also brought in other places in Midrash, but the Zohar points out that the or that was supposed to be was not the or that was. The light that was supposed to be was not the light that was. Because it says like this, with every other of the 10 utterances, it said, God said there shall be, or sometimes I translate it as let there be. Yeah, let there be light. I prefer to translate it as there shall be light, because who's letting, so to speak. But in any event, it says, with all the other creations, there shall be, or let there be, X, whatever it may happen to be, waters and the sun, the moon, stars, etc., whatever, and it was so. But here, when it talks about light, it doesn't say it like that. It says, God said there shall be light, and there was light. Because the light that was intended to be embedded in creation was actually hidden away. It was concealed. Why was it concealed? Several explanations are given by the commentaries, by the Zohar itself, and by various commentaries. And one of the reasons that the light was concealed at the beginning of creation was that we would have the merits of making the effort to uncover that light. Where was that light concealed? That light was concealed in the Torah. What is that light? That light, says the Zohar, is the inner teachings of the Torah. In other words, the teachings of Kabbalah. That's the light that has to be revealed. And that was not made available to everybody easily, openly available, because there were people who would misuse it. There were people that would use it for their own ends, for their own gain. But and that's why it was hidden away. But nevertheless, it is available for someone who digs deep enough and tries to find that light. Say the sages, that great saintly people are able to use that light to perceive from one end of the world to the other. Past, present, and future. They understand through that light. They are able to sense or to understand or to comprehend or have a vision of the true essence of things. The true essence of things. Past or present or future, etc. And there's many stories that illustrate such a gift that people have. For example, I could give you I'll tell you many stories. I'll just tell you one that I read recently. It's a story about the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov used to travel around to all kinds of villages and towns and all over the country, all over Eastern Europe. He would travel. The purpose of his travels was really to encourage simple, downtrodden Jews who were experiencing tremendous poverty and persecution at the hands of Cossacks and various others. There was all kinds of persecution going on at that time, and particularly the Chmielniki riots, which were happening at that. It happened shortly before, where Cossacks would go through villages and they would just chop people up with no apparent reason, and it was a terrible time. So he would go around from village to village, from town to town, and he would lift up the spirits of the people around. There were other reasons that he went around, and that was also to establish to establish and enlarge the society, or the secret society. It had to be kept secret, of Kabbalists and saintly people who would continue with his work of uplifting the spirits of the people around them. In any event, on one of his travels, he came to a certain town where he had a follower, and he as he very often did, the Baal Shem Tov, when he would talk to people, so he would talk to them about things that they knew. He wouldn't necessarily talk about lofty concepts and ideas in the Torah and start instructing them and teaching them, but he would talk to them about simple things. So I started talking to this disciple of his, and the conversation got around to this man was a landowner, and he had he had stables and barns, and he was a wealthy fellow. And so he started talking about his horses. So the Baal Shem Tov said, let's go and have a look at the horses. They go and discuss the horses, the advantages and disadvantages, and the better qualities and worse qualities of all the horses, and so on and so forth. And there was one pony over there that the Baal Shem Tov was looking at for a long time. And he said to the owner of the stable, I want you to give me a gift. So the man, even though he was a follower of the Baal Shem Tov, he said, yes, take any of my horses. So the Baal Shem Tov said, no, I don't want one of your horses, I want that pony. So the owner of the stable, the owner of the horses said, I can't give you that pony. That pony causes me such tremendous, the word he used was nachas ruach, which means delight. He gives me such delight and he makes me so happy, I can't give him away. And not only that, but when any of the other horses get stuck, let's say get stuck in the mud or get stuck with the wagon or whatever it is, this pony is is always the one that manages somehow or another to pull them out of the mud. The Baal Shem Tov just nodded and he changed the subject, and they went on and then went back into the house. And then they started talking about the debts that this particular man was owed. He was owed many debts, and as is the Jewish custom, the debts are usually written down. They're not just verbal debts. You write a debt down so that with witnesses and everything, so that it's a promissory note on which there's witnesses, and everyone agrees that this is what it was, and so on and so forth. So as it was showing the Baal Shem Tov the notes, the promissory notes of people who owed him money, the Baal Shem Tov looked at one, he picked out one, and he said, I want this one. And the man said to him, Rebbe, you can have that one, there's no problem, you can absolutely have it, but it's going to be totally useless to you because the man passed away several years ago. and his debt was never paid, which is why because he wasn't able to pay the debt. He passed away. He was a sick man, and he passed away. And I just kept the shtar. I kept the promissory note. I never got rid of it. So the Baal Shem Tov said, "No, this is the one I want." So he gave it to him, and the Baal Shem Tov asked his disciple, "Are you absolutely sure that you give it to me with a wholeheartedly?" He said, "Yeah, wholeheartedly. You can have it. You can do whatever you want with it." Baal Shem took the promissory note and he tore it in half, and again he tore it, and he said, "Let's come back to the stables." I went back to the stable, and they see that the pony's dead. The man was shocked, and he understood that it had something to do with this promissory note. So he asked the Baal Shem Tov, "What's going on over here?" So Baal Shem Tov told him, he said that the person who owed you that money, whose promissory note I just ripped up, that person, there was a judgment in the heavenly court that he had to come and pay off his debt to you through hard work. And the work that he did was through that pony. His soul would come into that pony, so to speak, or was in that pony, and was doing the work for you to pay off the debt of money that he owed you. And now that you gave me the shtar chov, now that you gave me the promissory note and I ripped it up, there was no reason for his soul to be in this world anymore. And therefore the pony died immediately. I ripped up the promissory note. Here we see that the Baal Shem Tov was aware of things that no one could be aware of had they not been granted insight into the original light of creation, which illuminates things from one end of the world to the other. There's a similar story with the Maggid Mezrich, or not a similar story, also a story that illustrates this idea from the Maggid Mezrich, who was the disciple of the Baal Shem Tov and his successor after the Baal Shem Tov passed away. A man once came to the Maggid Mezrich that he'd been robbed. His house had been broken into and things had been stolen. So the Maggid excused himself and he went out for a couple of minutes. He went to the outhouse. Those days, the bathrooms weren't inside the house; they were outside. And he went into, he went to the outhouse for a minute and he came back. And then he said, "Call such and such a person to come to me." And the person came, and the Maggid said to this person that he'd called immediately, "Admit your theft and give him back the money, and you have to pay a fine." And the thief he admitted it, but he said to him, "Rabbi, don't you have better things to do than to look for thieves? Aren't you supposed to be learning Torah all of the time? What are you spending time looking for me for?" So the Maggid said to him, "I only looked for you when I was in the bathroom. I didn't waste my time looking for you when I could have been doing something better." You can see again that the ability of great sages and saintly people to see things across time and space and across history, across into the souls of people it's legendary. So therefore, when we come to the first of the Ten Commandments and the first of the utterances, we can see that there is a clear connection. What's the connection? Again, the first of the Ten Commandments is, "I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt and gave you basically free choice. I laid before you," as the Torah itself says, "I set before you the life and good, life and goodness, or death and evil, and you shall choose life." That's what the verse says. It gives you the choice. When a person is enslaved, he doesn't have any choice. When he's in Egypt, he doesn't have any choice. When he's out of Egypt, he has choice. What's the choice that he should make? The choice is he should choose life. The choice is he should look for the light that is hidden in the Torah. That light is the light of, "I am the Lord your God." Knowing that there's no master over us other than the Lord your God. He's our master. And then the light that is hidden, that was hidden away, that can then become a light that will be revealed. Vayhi or, there will be light. And really it says, and there will be light. The light that will be, it will be revealed in the future. In the Messianic era, that same light will be revealed, the light that was hidden in the Torah. But we have to work on uncovering it now in order to bring about that era. So that is the first of the Ten Commandments and the first of the utterances. The second one is, you shall have no other gods before me. And the second of the utterances is, there was a firmament placed between the waters. Yehi rakia b'toch hamayim v'hi mavdil ben mayim l'mayim. There should be a firmament in the firmament between the waters that separates between the lower waters and the higher waters. So again, you shall have no other gods before me, and there shall be a firmament that separates between two states of water. First of all, let's discuss the two states of water. The Torah speaks about purifying water and deceiving water. Now, what does this mean? The waters that purify are the waters that are connected to a source. There's a thing called spiritual impurity, or tuma in Hebrew. That spiritual impurity requires immersion in a pool of water. That pool of water is called a mikveh. So immersion, and the thing about a mikveh, what is the why does this pool of water have the ability to purify certain levels of impurity? Because it's connected to a source. It's connected to the source of water. The highest levels of impurity can only be purified by water which is coming from a spring water. There's mikveh, which is water which is gathered together, but the highest level of purity of purifying waters is spring water. And it's that we had a lesson on this once, the whole cycle of water. But the water that we see on the surface is connected to water much deeper underground. And that underground, connected by a channel, that underground reservoir of water is connected to the spring which drips out. And in Kabbalistic terminology, it's basically the idea of the essence of something, or keter, the essence of something. That's the underwater, the under earth reservoir of water. And then what comes out in little drops is chokhmah. So the idea is that is water when it's connected to a living source, to a source of living waters. When a mikveh is connected to a source of living waters, then it has the ability to purify. Now, there is a teaching of the sages. Excuse me. There's a teaching of the sages that they're also called false waters, or lying or deceiving waters. What are those waters? Waters that dry up periodically, once in 7 years. Now, even though the water is flowing now, and it's H2O to all intents and purposes, and it looks like water, it smells like water, it tastes like water, it acts like water, it is water. There's no question about it. But because it's sometimes disconnected from the original source, it's not water that purifies, it's called false water. You can drink it, there's no problem, but it cannot be used for purifying spiritual impurities. Why? Because it's sometimes disconnected from the source. So, the rakia, the firmament that divides between the two waters, is the firmament that divides between true water, living water, and water which is disconnected. That's the firmament. To divide between truth and falsehood. Essentially, that is the idea. Similarly, exactly the same idea is that you shall have no other gods before me, is to divide between truth and falsehood. You can't have God and little gods, little forces. Forces which, as many pagan religions believed, that there are various forces of nature, and each one represents a different deity, a different. You have it today still in Hinduism and some other pagan religions. But there's only, as far as the Torah is concerned, everything is God. There's no other gods. There aren't any others. It's like the difference between living water and true water and false water. Something can't be half true. It's either true or it's not. In Torah terms, it's either true or it's not true. It can't be both. Even when it's flowing now, it's not true water if it dried up last year or the year before or 7 years ago, right? So that idea of you shall have no other gods before me, and let there be a division between one thing and another, let there be division between truth and falsehood, are obviously clearly interlinked. So that's the second of the Ten Commandments and the second of the utterances. Now, the third one is, you shall not take my name. You shall not take my name in vain. A person is not allowed to take God's name in vain, and it is paralleled by the idea of waters gathering into one place, into the seas. Now, what is this idea, this concept of taking God's name in vain? Taking God's name in vain or uttering God's name in vain means that we profane something. We don't treat it with the proper holiness and respect that it deserves. Now, when one does that, if a person would treat godliness or treat God, so to speak, in such a profane way, by uttering the divine names without due cause, or not at a time of prayer or not at a time of study, but just use it as a name for one of the divine names for secular purposes, for not positive purposes, that would be the same thing as the water being spread out and not being connected one to another. So before we spoke about dividing between the waters, the upper water and the lower water, the higher water and the lower water, or the true water and the false water, here we're talking about within the true water. If the true water itself is divided up, then it also becomes falsehood. It also becomes a source of negativity. If the waters of truth are divided in such a way, if they're treated in such a way that they're treated as sort of inconsequential, of no great importance, of no great holiness, of no great sanctity, then they too become stagnant water. They're no longer living water. It's not living water that can support life. It's stagnant water that ultimately brings about death, or is a reminder of death. So too, the same thing over here, realizing that certain things cannot be used in vain or used in a non-productive way. So too, the waters of creation, in other words, the life force that runs through us, has to be used in creative ways and not in destructive ways, in ways of gathering things together, not in ways of separation. As we all know, water is one of those things that it always sort of sticks together, right? If you put marbles into a bowl, each marble remains a separate marble. It's not same thing with grains of sand. Although the grains of sand might look like they're a thing, you can actually separate them out as one grain of sand from another grain of sand. Water, however, you can't really separate. One, you can separate into drops, yes, but you can't. The water itself is not. You don't really separate it in that way. It's all one thing. So the same thing is true of holiness, says the Zohar. Holiness should not be used for separation between things. That's the that's the third of the Ten Commandments, and the third of the utterances through which the world was created. Let's do one more, because we're not really going to have time for all of them. The fourth one is to remember the Sabbath, to keep it holy. And the parallel utterance is, let the earth bring forth herbs. So the Zohar says like this: when is it that the earth brings forth herbs? I would say that it is, says the Zohar, I would say that is on the Sabbath. Now, what does this mean over here? Basically, what the Zohar is saying is as follows: what happens on the Sabbath is there's a certain holiness that descends on the world on the Sabbath. That idea of holiness, that concept of holiness, is what causes everything to come to life. That holiness that descends through the Sabbath causes the world to start to grow. It's if you have a look at the story of Genesis, right in the beginning of creation, it says that everything, although it was created, had not yet started to grow. Nothing started to grow until man was created and the Sabbath came. Only then did things start to develop and start to grow. Now, why is it that the Sabbath has the special quality? The Sabbath has the special quality because the growth is not coming through something that we do. Sabbath is a day of rest. We don't do any work on the Sabbath day, and because we don't do any work on the Sabbath day, that's what actually causes the growth to happen. Which means basically this: that when a person realizes that all of the work that he does in his life and in the world is only, so to speak, a means by which divine blessing actually makes the thing happen, and it's not his. It's not the power of my hands. It's not my power and the power of my hands that makes things happen. It's divine power that makes it happen, and I just happen to be the means by which that is fulfilled. We could give an example of this for instance, something like, let's say, radio waves. Now, the radio waves are being broadcast by the broadcasting tower of the station that's broadcasting that particular on that particular wavelength, right? It's broadcasting no matter what, whether you have a radio or you don't have a radio. The fact that you have a radio and you have an antenna and you switch your radio on and you pick up the sound simply means that you're picking up something that's already there. This radio is now revealing what was already in the air all around it. The antenna is picking up the signal, and the speakers and the whole what's it called, electronic circuits. The electronic circuits within the radio are translating those electrical waves into sounds, and the same thing happens with us. The divine blessing flows through all of creation. We happen to be the receivers with our antenna, if we're fortunate enough, to be able to pick that sound up and to amplify it, to pick those waves up, translate them into things that are going on in our lives, and sort of amplify it. And that's what happens similarly with the Sabbath. The Sabbath is that idea of divine rest, of retreating into our innermost being. Communion with God is what the day of Sabbath is all about. That communion is what really causes growth within us. It causes things to start to sprout and to grow into the tree of life and so on and so forth, and into herbs, into positive things. But that really only happens when there's communion on the other side, communion with God, when there's that kind of relationship that the Sabbath represents. There are, we only got through 4 of them, there are another 6, but I think suffice it to say that we understand basically what the basic idea is. So just to sum up now, once we've studied a few of them, to sum up, the idea is that the 10 Commandments are really the energy, or let's put it this way, they're the purpose for which the creation is there. The creation itself is really inanimate in a sense. It's there, but if it has no function, if it has no purpose, it wouldn't be there. What's the purpose? The purpose of each of the 10 utterances through which the world was created is to reveal one of the 10 commandments. And that's what brings the world into balance. If it would be that something in the world has no divine purpose, first of all, it wouldn't be here. But our part in this is to reveal the divine purpose in everything that there is in the world that we come into contact with, whether it's through our possessions, whether it's through our relationships, whether it's through our studies, whatever. The whole point is to reveal Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I'm the Lord your God, and the various other concepts which are implicit or explicit in the 10 Commandments. Similarly, the 10 Commandments are they require the 10 utterances because God's intention is that to have a dwelling place, so to speak, that's the way the Midrash says it, to have a dwelling place in this world. God's intention is to have a dwelling place in this world. In other words, that this world should be a vehicle or a vessel for godliness. When these two things are kept in the proper balance, when we realize that a world without godliness and godliness, pure spirituality, without manifesting that in the world, would cause the whole thing to be out of balance, then we understand what the Zohar says about 10:10 were these sides of the scale, these spoons, or these the pans of the scale. Without the 10 Commandments, the world would be a place of spiritual and a place of chaos in every way, including spiritually. It would be completely a place of chaos where people would eat each other alive, basically. The 10 Commandments, without the 10 utterances, would simply be angelic, conceptual, but not practical things. And that's not what God wants. He wants the 10 Commandments to be practically implemented in the physical world in which we live. He wanted a dwelling place, so to speak, in the lower worlds rather than merely in the higher worlds. He wanted a dwelling place also in the lower worlds. And therefore, the 10 Commandments also needs the 10 utterances. I could share in the next class the other 6 commandments. Dennis is asking, could I share the other 6 commandments in the next class? Yeah, it's possible, but I'm not sure when the next class is going to be because I'm getting pretty close to the time I have to be leaving for my son's wedding, which is in Italy. He's marrying an Italian. She actually lives in Florida now, but her family's in Italy. Her father is the chief rabbi of Rome, so we're going to be going to Italy in another couple of weeks, and there's various preparations I have to make, and so on and so forth. In any nice Italian lady, yes, she's actually a lovely young girl, and my son is a very lucky young man to have found her. So hopefully I will be able to. Can we say? Sorry, there's some questions that I didn't notice here. David asked, can we say that they are like soul and body, the 10 Commandments and the 10 utterances? Yes, that's a very that's a very good way of putting it, like soul and body. That you have to have the soul, the 10 Commandments, and the body, the physical body, being the 10 utterances, and they work in tandem, they work in harmony. Let's see, like the water for the sota, I'm not sure what that had to do, But yeah, okay. Is this what meant by the Torah exists in our world and the Zohar in the spiritual night versus day? Well, I wouldn't say that the Zohar doesn't really live in this world as well. In other words, the Zohar is the spiritual inner dimension of the Torah. It's not something separate. This is a big mistake that many people make. They think that the Torah is the laws of the Torah are different from the so to speak, the soul of the Torah. In other words, the inner dimension, the Kabbalah and the spirit of the Torah, so to speak. It's not. They're not different. They're just different manifestations in different worlds. Kabbalah, the teachings of Kabbalah are in the world of Atzilut, in the spiritual worlds. And the teachings of Halakha, practical, down to earth, are in the physical world, in the world of Asiya and the physical world. But they're really one Torah. It's all really one thing. It's just they're different. It's different levels of interpretation, of understanding of, but it's one thing. Just as Zohar pointed out before, just as a body and a soul, body and a life force, you can have a dead body, it's not going to do much good. You can have a soul without a body, it's also not going to do much good. It's when the two of them come together that's where the exciting things start to happen. And the same thing is true of Kabbalah and Halakha and practical laws. So Terry asks, why are there different worlds? There are different worlds so that, essentially the different worlds are different levels of manifestation of divinity, of godliness, and different levels of consciousness. And why God decided to make it like that rather than just one world, that's anybody's guess, but that's the way he wanted to do it. And that's just the reality he created. I guess the point of it being that, we create into a physical world, which you can come to understand fairly easily. But the primary thing is to understand the underpinning of the physical world, the spiritual underpinnings of the physical world, which we get through Kabbalah and so on and so forth. I